Hey, everybody. It's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Thank you very much for being with us for our webinar today. First of the 4 pillars that we're doing on storytelling. I hope that you're with us because you've been playing around with our brand new tool, Storytelling for Good. If you're on your computer, and I expect you are, you can pull that up on a browser if you'd like at storytelling.comnetwork, that's C-O-M network.org. Over the next hour, we are going to have the great good fortune of being joined by Tim Lewis, Hadaway Communications. Tim and the team at Hadaway, along with the good folks at Rockefeller, helped us to build Storytelling for Good, and we really aim to turn it loose to help you all turn your organizations into storytelling organizations or build up that storytelling culture that perhaps you already have in place, and to help others along the way who are working at social good organizations in the foundation and nonprofit world. Hopefully, as I said, you're familiar with the platform, but we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Storytelling for Good. We're also going to do a few things that are a little bit different from webinars in the past, but we had quite a bit of success with them last time we did this, which is we've opened up the chat box. If you're used to the webinar technology that we use, and you look in your lower left-hand corner, you'll see a little box that you can click on to chat. And a number of us are now, hey Katie, hey Haley, hey Norris, Carolyn, Frederick, Tessa, Dennis, Megan. There's a lot of us. Actually, I should probably tell everybody. We have over 100 folks who've signed up to join us for this webinar, so there's going to be a lot of you. But we will be taking your questions across the course of the hour, and we can and should be chatting with one another in that chat box. So thanks, everybody, for chiming in. If you see something that you think is interesting or you know of a resource that perhaps you could point the rest of us to, by all means, the chat box is the place to do that. You can also, as I said, in the chat box, engage with us on Twitter. Our good friend Yabby Ferris, who runs all social media at the network, she's going to be live tweeting under the hashtag ComNetLive. That's COMNETLIVE. So you can follow along there. And, of course, as we always do, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post it up online at comnetwork.org for free replays over the next within the next few days, I think. So thanks again for joining us. Tim, why don't you go ahead and kick us off and get us started on this first webinar of Storytelling for Good focused on strategy.
Great. Thanks, Sean. We are very happy to be doing this. We at Hadaway feel very strongly about storytelling and the importance that it holds in our culture and in our work, and the power that it holds to do really good things in the world. Like Sean said, my name is Tim. I'm the Director of Content Strategy at Hadaway. And we are, in many ways, we are working alongside you, with you, to help figure out the best way to tell these stories and the best way to apply all of these principles from across culture and time that make up stories and storytelling to the work that you all are doing. So today I thought I'd give you a quick overview of what we'll do, and then we can get started. I want to give you a sort of a primer on the strategy behind Storytelling for Good strategy. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information that I think will help you set the context for what's beneath what we've built here. But then it could also serve to equip you with information that you can use to make the case for storytelling in your organization if you find yourself needing to do that. Then I'll move on to sharing one of the really important core tools in the strategy section of the Storytelling for Good platform, and I'll apply it to a real-world example so you can sort of see it come to life from theory to practice. And then we'll take a look around the strategy section of the Storytelling for Good website so you can get a feel for what's there. And all the way we'll be taking questions, so feel free to interject at any point. The first thing I wanted to do is sort of give you some science that you can have in your pocket. As you know, storytelling is on the top of everyone's minds these days for good reason. But we think it's really helpful to understand why stories are so important to really human beings as a species. To understand why it is that they carry such value in our world. So learning a few scientific principles that we've pulled together based on some of the work that we do and the research that went into building this platform. And then I'm going to, again, apply it to an example so you can sort of see it coming to life. So one of the first things to know about stories and how they connect to human beings just naturally is that they trigger pattern recognition in the brain. Our brains really despise randomness, and they're always trying to piece information together into patterns and trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And the pleasure center of our brain actually gives us a reward for recognizing patterns. And that's what ultimately keeps us engaged in stories. And that's why we keep coming back to them in our personal lives, telling the stories of our days, or reading a book or watching a TV show. It's really, our brains have been designed to reward us for figuring out those patterns. And so you can easily understand then why when we experience a new plot twist, or we get excited, or we get bored when, that horror movie you're watching, you starting to recognize you've seen it a lot before. The next point is that stories really help us see cause and effect relationships. From birth, our primary cognitive goal is to make causal connections. If this, then that. And so understanding why this caused that gives us a sort of repeatable hypothesis to start applying to lots of different situations. And it helps us anticipate how we're going to react based on past evidence. So, very basic example, if you're a little kid and you touch a hot stove, you are probably never going to make that mistake again. It's been very clearly defined in your brain that you touched that thing and, man, it hurt real bad. So you're probably not going to do that. And again, it's thinking of kids again, that's why the question why is always happening. We're always trying to figure out why something's happening, and if I do one thing, what will the effect be? So in its simplest form, that's what a story is. It's a connection between cause and effect. And when we have novels or films or TV shows, the protagonists and the villains and the other characters are really just giving a shortcut for seeing cause and effect in the world. The third point that I want to make is that stories really can engage the whole brain. And it's sort of incredible, the capacity for this thing that we've created as human beings, the storytelling, because what it does is that it replaces or it surpasses facts and data. It really helps us understand things much better than just the data on the page or the facts in some sort of presentation. And I'm going to show you in a second why that is. I'm not a brain scientist by any means, but I'm going to try to walk you through what's happening in the brain. But you literally become more interested through the act of engaging lots of different senses and triggering different points in the brain. So this slide, like I said, I am no scientist. I am a language, art, and story person. So I'm not going to try to tell you what all these different parts of the brain do. I imagine many people listening in right now could do a much better job than I. But, I know the olfactory, that's smell, auditory, I'm pretty sure that's sound. So you can see all of these different parts of the brain are responsible for different sensory experiences. And so the brain lights up when these things are triggered, and it really can engage us a lot more. So what we have here on the next slide is a story from a John Grisham novel, The Firm. And you can start to see all the different sensory details that are here. The phone ringing, there's snoring, feet on the desk, ankles becoming numb from lack of circulation. The potato chip bag, that probably has some smell and maybe some memories that they're gonna light up, but based on your consumption of snack foods. And then the phone rings, startled, and then it's his wife on the phone, right? So if we annotate that story, you can see all the different places that John Grisham has ignited the brain. I'm not suggesting that John Grisham has done this intentionally. I don't think he's plotted out all the different parts of the brain and what he's writing, what he's writing will apply to those things. It's just sort of a function of good storytelling. You're alive in the world and you're observing these things, and these things are naturally going to come out if you're seeking to really engage people and tell a story well. So that's just sort of a brief overview of some of the science behind why stories are so effective to us as human beings. And you can really start to see that it's really embedded in our core. This is in many ways makes up part of being human, is recognizing and being connected to these stories. So that's sort of a scientific background in stories and why they matter. And that, I think, primes us to understand why it matters to human beings. And then we can here move into understanding strategically how you begin building a story, how you move from that basic knowledge of stories can engage us entirely as human beings and move into what are some practical ways that we can start getting ready to tell stories ourselves. So right here we have 3 basic questions that we like to use when we start off thinking about a storytelling strategy for ourselves. And these questions get to developing a clear understanding of audience and purpose. And you all are communicators. I'm sure you're familiar with these concepts and their importance. But I just want to sort of run through them quickly with you so you can get a sense of when we're doing this work, what questions we ask and how we approach this point of entry. So the first is, what's the goal? And it's important to be clear on what you're trying to achieve. This could be the goal that you as an organization have, and to serve the broad story you're telling about the work that you do, or it could be the goal of a specific story that you are telling. What is the point of telling that story? What is the thing that you are trying to communicate or achieve through this one specific story? The key outcome here to keep in mind is that you really want to inspire people with a really big and bold vision of that change. What is the world going to look like as a result of achieving the goal? How will things be better for people and society? And, in the case of your audience, specifically those people that you're trying to reach out to. Next, we go into asking a question about people, because as you'll see in a second, people and your audience really have to be central to the stories that you're telling. So who is it that can help you achieve it? Whether that is, someone that you are working with or working for, or the people that come alongside you to help achieve those goals within your organization. And it's really important here to speak to their motivations and their doubts, those things that make up people, and the questions that they bring to whether or not they want to be involved in something, or how open they are to being moved to take a particular action. So again, really speaking to their lives and not just force feeding what you sort of think is the important thing for them to take away. And then finally, what can they do to participate? And you'll recognize this as a call to action, which that's exactly what it is. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more detail in a bit. But really the question here is, now that they've heard the story, what do you want them to do? What action do you want them to be motivated to take? And you might not always have a direct action. You might want them to join the organization, make a donation, sign a petition, volunteer in their community, whatever range of activities you might be hoping to achieve. But I think it's also important to remember that call to action is not just about doing something. There might be times when you don't have something that you really need people to do or want them to do. So we also enjoy the caveat of show how they can participate and also create a sense of urgency. Make them go, man, I really have to do something. Like, this is a pressing problem. I understand why these folks are doing this work, and it speaks to me, and I understand, and I see why what they're doing in the world is important. So that's sort of just some basics to strategy. And from here, I think it might be a good time. It's a lot of information in 10, 15 minutes. So I thought it might be a good time to take a Q&A break and see what you all are thinking so far.
All right, thank you, sir. I'm going to take the privilege of the first question. I know that you and some other folks have been out doing a series of workshops around the country focused on this. And I guess one of the questions I'd probably put to you is, What's the reaction you get when you bring this piece of it to folks, when you start talking about the idea of bringing strategy into your storytelling? It's not simply a matter of just picking up a piece of paper and starting it. There's a process and a discipline behind it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that people, storytelling is very, it's romanticized and it's sort of mystified in our culture, but there really are some specific things that you can do to tell stories and to tell them well. And because, there's such a premium placed on storytelling within organizations, and it's really every level of our culture and society, it can be very daunting. And because they're so ubiquitous, whether it's, what people are doing on Instagram in their personal lives or the YouTube videos that are out there, it can be a really daunting challenge. And so people, they come to it curious and sometimes a little bit afraid, but they're surprised to find out that, there are simple questions that I can ask to at least start crafting a story. And even if you don't consider yourself, a writer or, some sort of artist, you don't have to. You need to know what the basic structure and questions to ask at each step of the way are. And so people are really, they're surprised and excited in these workshops that we've been conducting to find out that they can have these tools to really start tackling what is often a daunting task.
All right, we've had a couple questions come in. Why don't we start with my friend Lori, who asked, remember when values were all the rage? Sharing the story from the values perspective of your audience, does that still matter? Are values important?
That is a great question, and we will definitely be talking about that because we do think that values matter. We sort of take a values based approach to storytelling. We prioritize people and their values. And those are they're two of some of the most crucial components of telling a good story. So absolutely, and we will definitely explore that coming up.
Great. Jessica asks, are there compelling methods that you've seen of telling stories that connect individuals to systems and the need for systemic change? So obviously a lot of folks on the call are working at sort of the 60,000-foot view, and they can see systems that are in need of fixing or adjustment, and trying to take these big things that oftentimes people just sort of take for granted and tying it back down to how that might affect somebody in their individual lives. How does one go about doing that? Is there a particular method that you've seen that's more effective than another?
Yes. So again, these are really great questions, and I'm glad you all are thinking this way because this is the way that we think. And I think I'm going to show you in the next section. I'm going to show you a narrative framework that speaks to this point. So one thing that we do in our storytelling work and really all of our messaging is needing to be very clear about what problem you are addressing. People need to understand what the obstacles are. And again, as we'll see in a second, this is very basic across all cultures and time in terms of stories that people have been telling forever. Is you have to identify the problem. You have to understand what is threatening ultimately people achieving their hopes and their goals and seeing their values realized. And so we make that a central point of our work, and you'll see it a little bit in the message I'm about to share. And then we also, in our work that we do studying the values of Americans today through our American Aspirations program, we are very interested in the stories that are being told, the narratives about things like systemic issues in the country, and how we work to flip those narratives, how we find narratives and then specific strategic stories tied to those narratives that can advance systemic change. So yes, I think you'll find that this approach is a great way to get started thinking about story and systems. And you can check out AmericanAspirations.com too to see some of the thinking that we've done there in terms of how you challenge systems through messaging and storytelling.
Okay, why don't we go ahead? We have a number of other questions, but I have a feeling, knowing what's ahead in your presentation, that maybe we should step into the narrative framework piece, and we'll come back to some of these questions because I think you're going to take them on, and I think it'll make more sense in that context. So why don't we go ahead and advance slides?
Great. So here it is. This is, we've sort of taken the common idea of a narrative framework that you can find in films and in stories and in religious texts. And we've worked in a few different ways, two really big ways, to apply the lessons from all of these really great storytelling traditions to the types of work that you all and that we all do. And so this one should look familiar to you. We have this overarching framework that when we say narrative in this case, what we're talking about is an overarching framework, the bigger story that is used to frame up individual stories about specific people in specific situations and put them in a broader context. So this really helps the audience relate stories of individuals to bigger ideas about society, to systems, to address that previous question. And if you don't put small, specific individual stories in a larger context, it's easy to dismiss them as individual one-off cases. So if you really are looking to motivate people for causes, you have to help them understand the big picture too. So this structure, again, if you've ever taken any sort of English or literature class, it's going to look familiar. So we put people in the protagonist space on the left there. And so these are our primary audience. This is your primary audience. It's what is the people that you're speaking to and about, and really making sure that they see themselves in the story. And then again, on the opposite side, we have the goals, the hopes, and the values of those people. What do they want for their lives? How do they want to be? How do they want to exist? How do they want to conduct themselves? What are they trying to achieve, right? And so those people are trying to get to that point. But of course, there's problems in the way. And when we talk about problems, we have to be clear about what they are. Like, what is it that's standing in the way of achieving goals? And this framework can sort of go back and forth, between your organization's goals or an individual's goals. But here we're going to really focus on what is it that the audience wants? What are the values of the audience and how do you connect to them? What is standing in the way of achieving that? And we find it to be very important to be specific here, to be specific and clear about what the problem is, and in many cases, who the actors are that are creating the problems. We did a lot of work around the financial crisis back in 2008 and 2009, and one of the big things that we found there was that people talking about they were blaming these mortgages. Poor people shouldn't have gotten these mortgages, or people were stupid. They shouldn't have borrowed the money that they borrowed. When what we found was, of course, that's not true. And so we found a phrase, fast-talking mortgage brokers. And that very succinctly and directly placed blame on people who really were to blame for what was happening, right? And so being clear about what the problem is, and in many cases, who is causing the problem. And then of course, at the top are the solutions. What is it that's going to help people overcome those problems and achieve their goals, live up to their values? And those are your organization's solutions. That's what you are trying, the good you're trying to achieve in the world. It's what you do to achieve that good. And then finally, the call to action. By creating a sense of urgency around these issues, what are you prompting people to do? What action is it that they need to take? So I thought it would be a good idea to, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is probably a good place to just share with folks that in a couple of minutes, we're going to actually walk you through some of the lessons, some of the templates that exist in Storytelling for Good on the website, so that folks can see we've actually, almost like a Mad Libs, tried to take you through this process. So I hope you're taking great notes, but rest assured, we're actually going to show you what we built that'll let you do this a dozen different ways and a gazillion different times. So just so you know, that's coming up.
Yeah, and I'm gonna walk you through. What I'm gonna do next is walk you through an example of an organization's narrative about themselves and the work that they do, and then you'll be able to see when we go on the site how you can start plugging that in yourself and guiding yourself through that. So this organization, PHI, that we've worked with, they're a bridge between people receiving elder care and disability services and the people providing those services. And this is their brand narrative that employs this structure. So PHI is caring, their narrative starts off with caring, committed relationships between direct care workers and their clients are at the heart of quality care. Direct care workers are skilled women and men who provide hands-on care and support every day to older adults and people with disabilities. So right there, you have the people who are doing the work in the picture and the people who are benefiting from the work. And we're describing them in very clear and humanizing, like positive terms, caring, committed relationships, skilled women and men, and older adults and people with disabilities. We understand who the people are that are being served and who it is that's doing the work. And then again, in the goals, these care workers are empowered to deliver quality care when they're valued as essential members of the care team and given high-quality training, living wages, and respect for the critical role that they play. So again, these are values, these are goals, these are things people need to live a good life. And we're going to now see that there's a problem. When direct care workers are denied the opportunities to learn, to grow, or even make ends meet, it's harder for them to provide the quality long-term care their clients deserve. So we're seeing that when these workers are not treated well, it's hard for them, and the people that they're supposed to be serving are also suffering. It's also harder to attract and retain caring, committed professionals to meet the growing need for quality long-term care. But PHI has a solution. Drawing on 25 years of experience working side by side with direct care workers and their clients in cities, suburbs, and small towns across America, they offer the tools necessary to create quality jobs and provide quality care. And here we actually will drill down a little bit in a little more detail to be really clear about what those services are, so that people can be clear as to what it is they're getting from PHI. But you can see that this is following that structure. It's speaking to values. It's being clear about the problems that stand in the way. And trying to see, I think we might be, so we're missing the call to action here, but I'll read it for you because in the face of a rapidly growing demand for quality care, the lack of well-trained direct care workers threatens to undermine the quality of life for older adults and people living with disabilities. If we don't recognize the vital role of direct care workers, we risk losing skilled, caring people. And that's the big thing there. We risk losing skilled, caring people. That's the urgency. They're going to go to other careers just when we need them the most, right? So it's really, you really feel that sense of urgency. We have to address this. We have to do it now. So that's the narrative. I figured this was a good time for another Q&A before we check out the site a little bit. What are people thinking?
Debbie has a question that I think still holds up, and her question is, what if the individuals that are reluctant to share their identity? So if we're talking about people and the challenges that they're facing and how they can achieve their goals, what happens when you can't say, it's Tristan or it's Sean or it's Tim or it's Hannah or it's Debbie? When people actually, you have a hard time of identifying individuals for presumably very, very good reasons. Does that make it more difficult, or are there ways around that?
It's a good question. We're actually working right now with an organization to help them figure out how to tell their story better, and they have people whose lives are literally in danger. The people that are out in the field doing the work, and the people who are out in the field doing the work, and the people that they're helping, their lives are literally quite in danger from very powerful forces in the world. And so, there's a real need to be careful about how you identify people. And I think, sometimes oftentimes it is about just working to find the right language, which can be time consuming and sometimes come at a little extra cost. But I think there is certainly a way to identify actors more generally, whether that's people part of the problem or people who need help, without calling out and putting people in danger. And so we're helping this organization think through that. What are the stories that you need to tell? And then very case by case, how do we how do we find ways to talk about people that we don't reveal identities, we don't reveal locations, so that we can, encourage people to be a part of the work, to support the work without endangering people's lives. So I don't know if that I answered that specifically enough, but there really are ways to do it, and I think it often has to be a case-by-case scenario.
Gotcha. Okay, 2 questions, and then Kristen's going to fire up the website so that we can all see how this actually works in practice. Lori asks, so we talked about PHI story, but how does that integrate into a wider communications framework? Did you create that for them? Because I think her take, and Allison sort of echoes this, the type of messages you're talking about tend to be long, right? What were other ways, suggestions you might have to make them more bite-sized?
Yes, so I think, and if you go to PHI's website, you can find this language. You don't find it all together. You find it in various different places. So the importance of a brand narrative like this, or an organization-wide story, is that, one, it's for you all. It's for you all to understand very clearly in your mind, wherever you are, what the story of your organization is. What you do, who the people served are, the problems you're trying to overcome. So it's first and foremost, it's sort of a organization-wide understanding of, this is our story, this is who we are and this is the work that we do, right? So that's a starting point, which then has implications for lots of different things, right? So if you go to PHI's website, you will find that they, where appropriate, they have the call to action. Where appropriate, they have the problem statement. So it can become sort of disassembled and embedded into web copy, into speeches, right? You can really start to build it out across different platforms. And then from there, also, it should inform specific stories and specific messages. So let's say you need to message around one particular issue. You know that you have your broader narrative to tie back to. You can always connect back to that bigger organizational narrative. And then you can also, when you're telling specific stories about a person or the work that you're doing, you can have this in mind too. You can understand that overarching narrative of your organization. So that's sort of how the approach that we take in developing these, and why this is often one of the first things that we do with an organization when we start working with them, is to really figure out what that core story, what that brand narrative of theirs is, so that it can inform everything else that flows from that.
Yeah, and I would I'd just say, I think we're going to move to the website in just a quick minute, but one of the things I would point maybe you to is the storytelling issue of change agent in the Network's Journal. If you're a Network member, hopefully you've seen that in your mailbox. It's a printed copy, but I think we've now also posted a lot of these online. And Jill Schwartz from the World Wildlife Fund wrote a really fabulous piece that talked about how WWF, World Wildlife Fund, now uses stories, and people are actually required to bring a story to a meeting, and that they integrate these and actually take these stories and deploy them in lots of different ways. But that organizational story of who they are and what they do and why it matters is then kind of wound into these things. It's a really fabulous piece. Maybe Yabby can add a link here in the chat box for us, pointing you to that, and you can also see it up on Twitter. We'll try to post it there as well. But why don't we go ahead and get to brass tacks, now that we're at the bottom of the hour, and show people the Storytelling for Good website. I hope a lot of you have already seen this, but let's go ahead and show us and take us through a couple of the lessons and see how this thing actually works. So just bear with us for a quick second, guys, just firing this up.
So if you, from the Storytelling for Good website, you sort of hover over that lesson section, and that'll take you to the 4 core components of the platform. And so under strategy, you're going to see right there at the top the narrative framework explained again, just as we did just now, so that you can start getting a sense of what those elements are. You can be reminded of those elements when you begin doing this work. And then you have these key lessons that really help you think through all of those points that we've just been talking through. So we can, I think maybe let's pop into the establishing the basics lesson. And so this is going to be, a great starting point for you, just to sort of really, get the basics, as this lesson suggests, of your organization, thinking through what type of work you do, large the organization is and the terms that you use to describe yourself. And this really helps, start pulling up some of those key features. How do you already talk about yourself? What work do you do? What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve through storytelling, whether that's raising money or attracting funders or talent? And so that'll start helping you get those foundational questions answered. If we go back, we can drop into the peoples and goals lesson. And so these lessons are going to start getting specific at this point to those components of that narrative framework. And each component has an example like this, so you're not going to be too lost. You can have a reference point. But really, you're just going to go through and start doing this. Like, describe the people that benefit from your work. Who are the people that you work with? And when you're talking about people, these tips are all throughout here. But one of the really important things that we say is, be specific, be tangible, describe people especially in ways that are going to make people see themselves, go, oh yeah, that's me. Like I am there. Like I do that. They're describing me. Or it's going to make people feel good or have positive associations with the people that you're trying to serve. And oftentimes, we find people sort of veering into language that is that can be a little more negative unintentionally. It's just sort of it's our lexicon. We tend to describe people that we're helping in sometimes pejorative terms. So it's really good to think through what are the ways that people are going to be able to see themselves, and then think and feel positively about people that they might not identify with in the narrative. So again, we walk through and we see who is helping to overcome the problem, what type of support you are looking for, who these people are, where they come from, and your goals. So we've made it really easy to walk through each of these sections, and then throughout in these lessons, you're also going to see articles that will sort of take you out to more information. So if you want to click up actually under Explore, at the very top there's an Explore tab, and that gives you the option to go to Guides and Articles. And let's go down to Articles. And then from Articles, you can start filtering through by what you're trying to do. So let's go ahead and filter by theme and topic, filter by goals. If I'm following along on my own computer and I'm messing it up. So you can call out whatever it is the goal of this narrative is. Let's say you're trying to raise money, and there you've got 19 articles that will take you down those lines. You can similarly, if you go up by filter by theme or topic, you scroll down and you can choose strategy, and you might have to get rid of the goal. Yeah, just choose strategy, and you've got 42 articles that will help you think through strategy. So that's sort of how these two components work together. You take the lesson, you fill things out, and as you're going, we have all these articles that have been written to help you think through or model these lessons as well.
Gotcha. And I would probably put to the group out there that's tuning in, is this resonating with you guys? Are there questions that this is prompting for you? Want to remind you, we've broken this whole website out into components. So today we're talking mostly about strategy, and I think the reason it just makes sense. It's where you ought to begin, but I guess one of the questions I'd put to the group, maybe you can answer in the chat box, is how many of you actually start here? Start at the drawing board before you run to the content, or think, more specifically, how am I going to deliver this? How much time do you allow yourselves to do the strategy piece here? And maybe while I'm asking you all and you're filling in some of the answers in the chat box, I'd put it to Tim, how much time should you be devoting to building out that how to get from here to there strategy piece?
Yeah, it certainly depends on what exactly it is you're working on, but I would say we start there for a reason. And all of our larger scale projects with clients, we really spend some time doing research, because the more information you can have, the more you can think through at the top what it is you need to communicate, what your goals are, how you already think about those things, the better position you are in to start really making meaningful and effective work. The stories that you tell are going to be much more meaningful if you've thought through why you're telling the story. And I have a film background, and I like to think in terms a lot of Hollywood. It's like, you think that, for most of us, a film or a TV show just appears on the screen. We find out about it and we go see it, or we turn it on. But the amount of time that went through thinking through that story before anything was even written, thinking through what type of audience there is for that movie, what type of messages the writer wants to convey about life or society through what they're writing. It really does. It's not something we're taught about creativity or art or storytelling for commerce, but you really do have to give a lot of thought up front to why you're even doing it, or else it sort of ends up being lost and oftentimes feels a little empty.
Yeah, there's a fabulous piece, I believe it was in the New Yorker, and forgive me, my memory is a little bit hazy, but it was a fabulous piece on Pixar, the animation, the digital animation company based out on the West Coast, talking about how they build stories and how much time and discipline and how many people are brought in to think through things. That Finding Nemo, I think, was one of the examples that they said in this piece, which maybe we'll be able to cook up and put on Twitter or in the chat box for you. But how much time and effort is really spent before any time or effort is spent on creating the content, on putting pen to paper, as it were.
Yeah, Pixar is really they're some of the leaders in terms of this. They really do think through so many different components of the story, including audience and characters and why the story even matters. They're really, and there's lots of I know you're speaking of, Sean, I think it is New Yorker, but there's lots of information on the internet that they've freely made available about their process. They're a great group to look at.
And so we're hearing from a few folks in the chat box. I imagine you guys can read this for yourself, but Catherine writes, we need to put the most time on strategy, but sometimes it takes convincing for our colleagues, for senior leaders, to see the value of thinking things through, like audience and key messages they want to get right to creating that content. And my guess is that's a sentiment that's shared. It's a pain point for a lot of us who do this work. But I would also just remind you, at least from my perch, that's our responsibility. I mean, that is why we collect a salary, is to occasionally slow the process down, to offer people a pathway that's going to be a lot smarter than just jumping right to it, even if that maybe is not as sexy or as enticing to some folks elsewhere in your organization. Tim, what else can we show them that you think is really worth their time? I know we just took them through those two lessons. And actually, maybe related to that, there was a question from, Amanda was asking just a tactical question about this website, which is, what happens if you fill in all your strategy answers in the lessons piece? Does it just compile all the answers in a document, or is this an exercise to get us thinking about the answers?
That is a great question. I'm not sure I can answer appropriately, because I'm unclear as to what happens on the back end. But from what I understand, in those lessons there is an advance or keep going, and from what I understand, that's sort of saved and compiled so that you can have access to it. But the idea is that you are entering this information, and it's being stored so that you can return to it and parse it out and keep on working and fleshing it out as you need to. But then just generally too, I think the idea is that, and I think that some of these articles do this work too. It's like, this is an ongoing process that you can come back to over and over and over again to refresh yourself, or as you're working on a particular story or topic, to give you that perspective and that framework. And in terms of, just to call back to that question or that statement previous about having to get buy-in and convincing people, again, I think that a lot of the resources on this site will be helpful in giving you some armor, and that's sort of why I wanted to start at the top of this presentation, giving you some of that background information, because we often find that, especially if you can be, scientific and come at this with a sort of maybe a slightly academic angle, to say to people, look, this is verified by science. We like to say that science tells us that art has power. And so, you have to really take some time and invest in that. And I think the resources here in terms of the articles and the guidebooks too can really help you understand some of that basic information to make that case.
And again, I'll just point to another resource for you all. Our good colleagues and friends down at the University of Florida, and Cristiano and the team down there, recently published a new report on the science of storytelling, or science of story building. We included a piece of it in the recent issue of Change Agent. But if you're looking for some data or facts to make the case for storytelling at your organization, Anne will arm you with quite a lot of really good information, both through that article, and she's also, I suspect, would be more than happy to hear from you if you were to contact her over email. Why don't we go ahead and take people through the problems and solutions and the CTA lesson, just so people can see it for themselves. And I guess I would just add on top of what Tim had said about how this is intended to be used. We're hoping you'll take yourself through the whole process. We start with strategy, and over the next few weeks, we're going to take you through some of the other lessons. But the aim here is that you would use this as sort of an exercise to help you, in a very thoughtful, disciplined, and scientific way, build up kind of a treasury of what the strategy is, and then the content, the ideas that you're trying to put forward through stories, so that you have a bank of that you can then use and deploy in lots of different ways. And then also, it's probably worth reminding everybody, we built this not just for folks working in the communications department. We really built this with an eye towards folks who perhaps are deputized by you. They're out in the field, or others, to help them get a sense of the process that you as a professional communicator would go through to develop and share a story. Because we really think success looks like not just the comm shop that's leading on this work, or maybe you're leading it, but that there are others who are deeply involved, and that this is a tool to help bring them along. But why don't we go ahead and take this lesson with that wind up?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see here, continuing to follow that narrative structure, we're going to get into a little more detail about about the problem, the solution, and the call to action are, and really helping you think through defining those components, thinking through, giving you some questions to ask. And I think right there in the problem section, that's a really important one, is what is standing between the people you're trying to help and the goals you're trying to achieve. Really making it clear what those things are. And then again, examples along each way. And something I'll say, pausing on the problem, one thing that you see here is, it says more than 20% of high school students do not graduate on time. That's a really important tactic, which is one surprising fact. Oftentimes, these problem statements that are crafted are full of very shocking, scary data that really open your eyes to things that are happening, why whatever it is a problem. But oftentimes, too much of that is overwhelming and creates problems of clarity. So this example right here is a really great example of doing what we like to call surprising facts. So you find one really surprising thing to open people's eyes, and that's generally enough to get them to pay attention to that problem. But again, as you scroll through, we have the same basic structure: solution, explanation, and example of what that solution is. This is another organization that we work with, America's Promise, and you can fill out and answer those questions as you go, and then select modules in these lessons have articles to link out to. And if we want to go back and take a look in the audiences and objectives lesson, you can see here. Again, we're going to walk you through your supporters. And what we've done here is that recognizing that your audiences are often made up of lots of different types of people, and you might need to have to consider different things that each of them needs to do. We've given you, I think it's 6 opportunities here. 6 opportunities to identify multiple types of supporters. And what it is that you're trying to get them to do, what it is that you need them to take away from your story or the narrative that you're putting forth. I think that's the last lesson. Yep, that's it. And then beneath it, back on that lessons page, we've sort of cultivated a few of the key articles about strategy that are available, and each lesson has that as well. At the bottom, you're going to see some of the top articles pertaining to that theme.
This is maybe a good time to take Andrew's question, Tim, which is, we found that a lot of the stories that we collect support but don't align perfectly with our organization's established messages. How do you balance authenticity with making sure you're aligned on message? What has to give?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, because you want people to be empowered to tell their own stories, and sometimes we hear the opposite thing, which is we can't get people to tell stories. So there are lots of different challenges that come up here, and it might depend based on the literally the individuals that you're collecting stories from. But I think something that is good to think about is, if you're collecting stories from the field or from people who maybe aren't comms people, is having some sort of capacity to run it by, like pass it through to make sure that it passes the narrative test, so to speak. And then something else that we also think is really important too is being able to train people internally to understand. So if it's maybe once a year or at some sort of regular gathering that you have, having an opportunity to get up and say, hey, here's what we do. Here's our work. Here's where we're coming from. This is our sort of approach to storytelling, and some important themes to include. And helping people understand what it is that you're about, because you're right. You don't want to strip authenticity. You don't want to completely steal, modify someone's story so that they're feeling disempowered and they don't want to give you any more stories. But having some opportunities to explain what you're doing is helpful. We also recommend something that we do. We have what we call winning words, which is identifying some really key words or phrases that are either ideas that help people frame up or that can be utilized in the story, so that we know that, okay, X, Y, and Z is really important. And in the case of PHI, it might be, caring, committed, professional, something like that. Very, very specific words or phrases that you want to make sure people are remembering to include. So I think that's a tool that can be helpful as well.
Lori asked a question. She asked it earlier, but I think it makes sense there. She says, totally on board with the length thing, but with ever-shrinking attention spans, what's your point of view on the length of a story, Tim? Particularly as someone who's spent a lot of time working in Hollywood and knowing that, increasingly things are now being made in 1-minute bite-sized videos or tweets even, I guess, today, or what counts for foreign policy or public policy. Yeah. Maybe what we could do is pull back up the site. Tristan's going to call this back up for you guys. So this is on that storytelling.comnetwork.org site. And as he pulls it up, one of the things we can show you, Lori and everyone else, is, Tristan, if you go to Explore, and Tim, you can kind of just explain to folks what these are, click on Guides. We've actually, a big thing about Storytelling for Good is that, just as a premise, and I'm sorry if we walked right past this, everybody, but sort of one of our premises is that telling stories in the 21st century today looks a lot and feels a lot different than it did 10 or 15 years ago, and that's probably only accelerating. So we didn't just want to give you sort of the tried and true way of telling stories that's been passed down across eons. We also wanted to find ways to help you tell stories in different platforms, because they vary from place to place. The way a story might work on Instagram may not play on a Facebook or might not work on your website. So, Tristan, if you can sort of scroll down a little bit here, and Tim, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but can you, just as an example, maybe we could point to a guide to YouTube, Tristan. Maybe we could click on that.
Yeah, I'll say
that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. The attention span thing has all sorts of implications, and obviously across the world and all the corners of it and where people spend their time, but specifically with storytelling, right? Because Hollywood's facing some real challenges, and then anyone doing any sort of communications work, because of one, attention span, but also the volume of there's just too much. So I'll say two things. One, to Sean's point, that's what these 17 guides are for. So there's a guidebook for every single, we have got YouTube up now, and there's a guidebook for every sort of major platform that's out there that can help you understand what it is. If you can scroll down this one, it'll explain you what it is that it does, what the sort of nature of the platform is, and then it's going to walk you through what content is right for this platform, what content to sort of steer clear of, and it really gives you a full picture of the use of each platform. And the other thing that I'll say is to stay tuned for our engagement webinar that'll be coming up later in the year, because that's where we're really going to get into some more specifics about understanding how this all plays out practically speaking, how you take a broader story and translate it into something bite-sized, or how do you prepare once you have these stories? How do you prepare them for different types of engagement? And so we go into greater detail there, and you can also explore the engagement lesson that's currently on the site. But these guides are a great first step in sort of understanding what your options are for distribution and the pros and cons and limitations of each of those, and how to really use them well.
Right, and as Tim said, as you can, of course, explore this resource at any time at your leisure. There's a lot here. We tried to sort of ask and anticipate a lot of the questions that you might have, and tried to make it so that you could basically navigate this without any help from us. Of course, we're always on the other side of an email, and we are doing these webinars in the spirit of trying to help you all get familiar and comfortable with these things. But I also think the way we built these is such that you could, with some confidence, feel like you could take yourself through a lot of this work without ever hearing from us. But again, we'd love to hear from you. We're just about at the end of the hour. I think this is probably the place where, Tim, are there any closing thoughts, or did we get to every place you wanted to go?
I think we got everywhere I wanted to go. I'll just say, we're going to continue doing these for the rest of the year, hit on the different lessons, and I'm going to put up, we're sharing your screen, but I'm going to put up, we can go back to the slides. You can take a look at my email address. If there's anything that you are interested in exploring further, any questions you have, we really care about this type of work. We care about making sure you all have what you need. So I'm available for, if a question pops in your head, you're thinking about this later today, and you want to just rattle off a question to me, I'm available and happy to engage with you that way.
Yeah, I think the thing you all should hear as we sign off is that we're all in this together. I think we're all on this call because we all believe that stories are incredibly powerful. As you've probably seen at the network, we've been devoting a lot of resources, whether it's working with the team at Hadaway and Rockefeller to bring this resource to you, or whether it's the Change Agent Journal. There'll be more. This is where I do a shameless plug for ComNet. For those of you who are going to be joining us in San Francisco, we're going to continue. There's a storytelling track, which includes, we're working with some folks from the MOF and the National Storytellers Network. There's actually going to be a whole session with storytellers from the Bay Area coming in and taking you through strategic stories they've developed that are working in the social good space out there in the Bay Area. So some really exciting stuff to come. We'll also have more webinars. The next one on storytelling is going to happen on September the 18th, so in just a few weeks' time. We hope you'll join us for that. And we will be seeing many of you hopefully online. We're also doing another in-person workshop that will be happening in Washington, D.C. with the Com Network D.C. local group. I believe that's the first week of September. You can find more information if you're in the Washington area or you're nearby and you want to join us for the day. It's going to be hosted at the World Wildlife Fund. You can find information on that at the Com Network's website right now. It's on the homepage. I think you can link to that for RSVP. I will say thank you very, very much to Tim. I hope you learned, as I have come to know, what an incredible, bright, thoughtful, talented, deeply engaged leader he is, and so grateful for his time. Looking forward to seeing many of you in person in just a few weeks' time. And for now, I think we're going to sign off and say thank you. We will have a recording of this up online in just a few minutes. And then finally, as you get off the webinar tech, you're going to be sent a quick survey. Please take that. It just helps us get a little bit better, which is something we're always aiming to do. And we wish you all well and hope if you're on the East Coast enjoying this heat wave that you're someplace and can stay cool. Talk to you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.